Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Americas. Here's a look at what's coming up in today's show. The biggest political party in Brazil walks out of the president's ruling coalition. That makes it even tougher now for Dilma Rousseff to survive mounting pressure to impeach her. A hard-fought victory in California as a deal is reached to increase the minimum wage. It's due to go up by 50% to $15 an hour over the next 6 years. And as Colombia negotiates a peace deal to end decades of conflict with FARC rebels, one of the biggest tasks ahead is tracking down those who've gone missing. First, there is more bad news for the Brazilian president Dilma Rousseff. This week, the country's largest political party left her governing coalition. That could be a potentially fatal blow for Rousseff, who's already battling accusations she tried to hide how bad the state of Brazil's economy really is. She'll need a third of the votes in the lower house to block any move to impeach her. With more on that story, here's Clément Bonnereau.
Dilma Rousseff one step closer to impeachment as the largest party in Brazil's ruling coalition voted to pull out on Tuesday.
From today onwards, in this historic meeting for the PMDB, the PMDB is breaking with President Dilma Rousseff's government.
The centrist PMDB party called for an immediate exit from President Rousseff's government, though it's unclear whether any PMDB ministers will choose to stay in her cabinet. But already there are fears the move could lead to a domino effect, with more parties pulling out of Rousseff's coalition. That would mean the president may no longer have the votes to block impeachment proceedings against her. Rousseff has been accused by some parliamentarians of manipulating budget figures to hide a growing fiscal deficit, though she denies any wrongdoing. If she's removed, she would be replaced by Vice President Michel Temer, the leader of the PMDB. This has prompted many within Rousseff's own Workers' Party to denounce a coup against the current president.
It is surprising to see someone who claims to respect the Constitution adopt this pro-coup position. That's what Michel Temer is doing. He will enter history as a putschist.
Observers now say Rousseff could be suspended from her job as early as May, while the Senate decides whether she should leave office permanently.
And another political clash could be on the horizon in Venezuela. The parliament, led by the opposition, has approved an amnesty bill for political prisoners, a move opposed by the president, Nicolas Maduro. The measure demands the release of some 80 political prisoners and hundreds more persecuted and exiled due to their opposition to the leftist government, a government that's been in power for the past 17 years. The opposition says the law is aimed at laying the foundations for national reconciliation, but the president says it will only benefit, quote, criminals and terrorists. Now, the U.S. presidential race took another strange turn this week when Donald Trump's campaign manager was arrested. Corey Lewandowski was charged with battery for grabbing and bruising the arm of journalist Michelle Fields. She was trying to ask the Republican frontrunner a question when she was roughly pulled away. The billionaire candidate, whose rallies have been hit by a string of protests and violent outbreaks, says he supports his campaign manager, who won't be fired. Well, that prompted the reporter to defend herself on Twitter and accuse Trump of lying. Meanwhile, minimum wage workers in California got some good news this week. The state has reached a tentative deal to raise the wage by 50%, from $10 to $15 an hour by 2022. That landmark agreement would make California's minimum wage the highest in the nation. Sanam Chantier reports.
A hard-fought victory as a tentative agreement has been reached to raise the minimum wage in California to $15 per hour. That's 13 euros. And it was the governor who announced the deal, struck by lawmakers and labor unions.
It's a matter of economic justice. It makes sense and will help our entire state do much better for its citizens.
By next year, California's statewide minimum wage will undergo a 50-cent raise from $10 an hour and then gradually increase to $15 by 2022. Businesses with 25 or fewer employees will have an additional year to comply, delaying the implementation of the wage increase until 2023. A higher minimum wage would benefit millions of workers, most of them legal migrants who are struggling to make ends meet. Among them, Chantel Williams, a single mother of two who works at a fast food restaurant.
It's very difficult. You can't even make it. Government assistance for help, basically for medical, food stamps, to help be able to pay rent and provide food for my family, of course.
The U.S. federal minimum wage has been $7.25 per hour since 2009. Across the country, some 15 states fall under this red category. 30 prefer a higher salary, highlighted in green, and Georgia and Wyoming in yellow are earning less. There are also 5 southern states where, due to a lack of union presence, there is no minimum wage. The legislation now requires a simple majority. If passed in California, it could trigger a wave of wage increases at state level across the U.S. Meanwhile, some lawmakers are concerned that many businesses won't be able to sustain a higher minimum wage and that the bill will adversely affect the economy.
Next now to Colombia, where the president, Juan Manuel Santos, has told FARC rebels to set a date to disarm. That's after they missed last week's self-imposed deadline to sign a peace deal. Santos has staked his presidency on bringing peace to Colombia, where the FARC has been fighting the government for more than half a century. The peace process has been ongoing for over 3 years, but key questions, including disarmament, do remain unsettled, and there are many challenges as well. One of the biggest among them is tracking down the thousands of people missing in Colombia over the years.
Thousands of nameless bodies fill cemeteries and clandestine graves in Colombia. They're the country's disappeared, a painful reminder of the vicious armed conflict that's torn its people apart for over 50 years. After searching for her husband for nearly a decade, Dora Alicia Gonzalez finally buried his remains last December.
I looked at the skull where they shot him. I looked at all his bones that had turned dark. That's really tough.
Dora Alicia says the funeral at least gave her closure. The Colombian prosecutor's office located her late husband's remains in a cemetery in Vista Hermosa, one of the worst-hit areas. Today, that municipality is one of 5 where government negotiators and FARC rebels plan on intensifying the search for missing persons. They're hammering out a peace deal in the Cuban capital to end half a century of strife.
These exhumations started because the negotiators in Havana demanded it. So our role is simply to identify and return these bodies.
The deal between the FARC and the government has a purely humanitarian goal: exhuming, identifying and returning the bodies to their relatives. Finding those responsible isn't part of the process, however, although many families feel the need to know who's behind the disappearances.
They start to demand justice. They want to know the truth. And it's precisely when the bodies are returned that the demand for justice begins.
There are over 23,000 unidentified bodies in cemeteries alone. Tens of thousands more have yet to be found in remote areas. Victims of the conflict hope peace will help them get the truth about their missing loved ones and eventually heal their wounds.
We'll leave you now in Cuba, where an artist has teamed up with Google to create one of the only places to get free Wi-Fi in Havana. That's a real revolution in a country where it's still close to impossible to get on the internet at all.
It looks like an everyday street scene, but for these young Cubans, it could be the start of a new era. They're gathered at one of Havana's rare free Wi-Fi hotspots, in a country where less than 5% of the population has access to internet. For the past 2 years, local artist Kecho has been offering this service at his studio and is now partnering up with Google to create a public connected workspace in the Cuban capital.
With this, we're able to overcome a lot of taboos around things like the American blockade. It's the future and it needs to be done. Cuba's been stuck for too long. And the embargo won't go away by itself. We have to help lift it with intelligence and brave projects such as this one.
Equipped with dozens of laptops and smartphones, the studio can host about 40 people at a time. A drop in the ocean, yet Keicho's vision is spreading, and millions of Cubans have begun to dream of a connected future.
What we'd really like is to have widespread access to the internet. That means a fast internet that can be accessed from home, not just hotspots. A real World Wide Web, like everywhere else.
An ambitious plan considering that 10 years ago, internet access was still a distant dream for a vast majority of Cubans. It was only in 2013 that the regime loosened its grip on information and created around 120 cyber cafes across the island. But the connection was slow and the cost steep, $2 to $4 an hour, in a country where the average wage is around $20 a month.
For a regular Cuban, it can be difficult to spend money on this. It's really something extra.
While the rest of the region has built a vast array of connected networks, Cuba has largely remained isolated. The island relies on a single underwater cable to Venezuela for all of its internet access. The opposition says the regime willingly interfered with the modernization of Cuba's network to prevent the free exchange of information. Cuban authorities, meanwhile, blame the American embargo for the country's digital deficiencies. But with the U.S. gradually lifting its sanctions, they may have to find new ways to satisfy the population's hunger for new technologies.
Well, that's all the time we have for this Inside the Americas. We'll see you again next week for all the news from north to south.